has started.
Sorry.
Welcome to, the problem I have with panels is the best stories happen before or after they start officially. And I hope you heard most of that because it was a story about the esteemed Fred Saberhagen at his second LibertyCon where nobody introduced him until you came along and introduced him.
One thing I will do is fill the dead space in a room.
Yeah, nobody on this panel likes dead air, myself included, but you're not here to see me. My name is Jean Marie Ward. I write fiction, nonfiction, and everything in between, but I don't write epic. So therefore, I'm moderating the panel of How Epic is Epic. And all of the gentlemen to my right, you are gentlemen, aren't you?
No.
No comment.
Okay, define, well, no, we won't get into that. But anyway, all of the gentlemen on my right write wonderful, epic fantasy and science fiction and a lot of things in between. And I am going to ask them, even though you know who they are, this is not Fred Saberhagen, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, beginning with David Coe, AKA DB Jackson.
So I've been on these panels before where I'm on a panel with like huge names, all right? And every time they say their names, like, hi, I'm David Weber, the crowd goes like, wow, they clap and everything. So I'm gonna say right now, when I say my name, y'all are gonna clap. My name is DB Jackson. You are a very good audience.
DragonCon trained you well.
He was the first one to say yes, he wanted this filmed. So.
I also write as David B. Coe, which is my real name. I write epic fantasy, I write urban fantasy, I write media tie-in, supernatural thriller. I'm an editor. I've been doing this for a long time, although not as long as the Altacaucus to my left. And I am very pleased to be here.
I'm David Weber. David, was it DragonCon that you and I first met at?
No, it was Magic Carpet
Was it Magic
Con.
Carpet Con? Oh, that long ago. Wow. You have been doing this for a while. Anyway, we've known each other for quite some time, and that's true of Tim. I haven't known Kevin as long. But this is, I think this could be a fun panel.
I'm Timothy Zahn. No applause for If epic is defined as more than 2 or 3 books in a series, I've done epic Star Wars, Quadrail, Cobra, Black Collar, a couple of others, and there are going to be some interesting questions Jean Marie was talking about earlier. So I'll turn it over to Kevin. I've known him, what, way too long? The other way around?
Well, no, just long enough.
Just long enough.
We still like each other, so it's been just long enough.
Yeah.
I'm Kevin J. Anderson. And just for you guys, I stopped wearing my black sport jacket that I always wear just because I feel so comfortable around you. I feel much more comfortable without wearing that thing. So, I've written lots of big epic. I've committed several trilogies. I've written some like multi-book series of the giant choreographed multiple storylines. And I really enjoy getting into this story that is so huge it takes multiple volumes and zillions of points of view, but it's a lot of work, and we'll talk about constructing them and whether it's better to just write little short stuff. So,
Well, it depends on your fans. Okay, well, let's just start with that question because the description of this panel posed 2 questions. How epic is epic? What makes a story epic? Because obviously it is not genre. We have people here who represent all kinds of epic stories in all subgenres of science fiction and fantasy. And I'm sure if they turn their hand to it, they could do it in other areas as well. So, Kevin, what makes a story epic to you, and how does that relate to your work?
Well, one of the things that I think of is that an epic story should have like multiple points of view and lots of different characters and lots of storylines. It's not the first-person detective story with one crime to solve. I was on a panel with Brandon Sanderson once, and we were discussing this, and we said that the story itself was the main character, and it had so many different points of view. There, just sort of as a shorthand thing, when I think of epic, I think of things like Game of Thrones or The Expanse, or just stories that are just so huge you couldn't possibly tell the story in one book or in one short story.
Okay, I'm going to skip around a bit. I'm going to get to everybody, but I just don't want to keep going back and forth down the line straightforwardly. So I'm going to go next with David Weber. What makes a story epic for you?
I don't necessarily think that it's the scale of the ensemble or the number of volumes in the story, although I think those are definitely factors. I think epic is more the scale of the tale that's being told. That you could have an epic with a very small cast, that because of the nature of the challenges that you're setting them and what they need to deal with becomes an epic struggle, an epic story, whatever. I do agree that most epic stories are going to be too big to fit into a single set of covers. I remember back in the early 90s when Jim Baen said to me, basically, David, all your stories seem to spawn sequels, so I don't know, why don't you like plan a series from the get-go? And that was where Honor Harrington came from. That's where the Safehold series came from many years later. That's where the Gordian Protocol came from many years later. And all of those are stories that were too big to tell in one set of covers. So I do think that that's a factor in determining what makes a story an epic story. But, you know, like I say, to me there's a balance point between it's a big story so it needs a lot of volumes, or it's an epic story because of the scale of the struggle and so forth that are also inherent in it.
Okay. DB?
Actually, Kevin and David have done a very nice job of encapsulating what the criterion are. We're talking about states. You got your applause.
You set it up.
I am surrounded by comedians.
It's the stakes, it's the cast, it's... I went to Alaska many years ago, and there's this phenomenon you see in Alaska and very few other places in the States called braided rivers. And there are these rivers that come together with various flows of water and silt from glacial sources. And they come together and they form these complex river systems where you have, at times, a full flow and at times kind of separate streams, but all going in the same direction. And in a way, that to me is an epic story. It's the idea of you have a ton going on, all leading toward one big story that you're trying to tell. But the cast of characters, the stakes, and everything else transcend boundaries. They transcend whatever borders you've set up in the world you've created or the solar systems you've created. And it's this coming together of many smaller contributory stories. And that to me is what epic is.
Okay, and how do you apply it to your own work? For example, would you describe the Chalice War as an epic?
Absolutely not. It's an urban fantasy. There's a big struggle. This is a new series I have out this summer. It's Celtic-themed urban fantasy. It was really fun to write, but I wouldn't call it epic. It has a limited cast. The stakes are huge, but the story is fairly straightforward. There aren't a whole lot of plot points coming in from different directions. So no, I wouldn't count that. My Winds of the Foreland series, which was a 5-book epic fantasy series that was huge and sprawling, and that I've just tried to edit from OCR scans, and I'm wondering what the fuck I was thinking when I wrote it. But but that's epic. It's huge and almost unmanageable.
Okay. Tim, what about you? What is epic to you, and how do you apply it to your own work, and how does that fit in working in somebody else's universe? A universe that itself is defined as epic.
Yeah, I agree pretty much with everything everybody said. I think in some sense we've got I know epic when I see it. I'm trying to think of a single book epic, and I'm thinking the original Dune may qualify as that. It's still the small cast of characters, but it does have huge stakes. There are a lot of lives on the line. They're not just their existence, but their future is on the line. I think maybe that is part of it. Most epics will be multiple books, but you can do it in one big book if you're really good. How do you do it with somebody else's universe? You get them to pay for more than one book at a time. But no, it's the same sort of thing. I set up. You've got a decent-sized cast, but a few core people that you're going to follow, and they're going to be your primary people, and then just big stakes, big setup, big payoff.
Would you say that what you're really looking at is stature in the story in some ways, in terms of not necessarily the size of the cast of characters, but the quality of the cast of characters?
That's always a consideration, whether it's epic or anything else. But yeah, the quality, the heroic nature, even when they're flawed, perhaps part of that as well.
Even especially if they're flawed.
Yeah.
I think there's what you might call the epic investment of the reader in the story. Everything we write is a collaboration with the reader, and if the reader is not going to invest the energy and the emotional freight in the story that you're writing, it's never going to attain epic status. Okay. And so you have to find a way to bring the reader inside with you, which in my opinion means creating characters that will bring the reader inside to do it. But I think that is definitely a factor in anything that would be considered epic, is the degree to which the reader is invested in it and follows it and supports it.
So it's not just them caring about your characters, but caring about what they're fighting for or struggling for.
Yes.
Yeah,
you could write a compelling novel about deciding who you're going to the prom with if the characters are going to involve the readers in it. You can write a novel about saving the universe that sucks wind if it's not going to involve the readers in the characters. But I think Tim is absolutely right, that if you're going to go beyond, this is a really good novel that I liked, to this is an epic story, then it has to deal with a scale of challenge that also qualifies for the E word, if the story as a whole is going to get there.
Okay, which gets into the second question I wanted to ask. How do you, having defined it, how do you construct it? I'll start again with you, Tim, and then I will bounce around again and ultimately get to everyone. So, Tim, how did you set about constructing the epic?
They say the best way to win a golf game against an expert is to ask him to describe how he swings, because he's so used to it. If he actually has to pay attention to it, he will screw up.
I just screwed up all of it.
It's a matter of, I know I've got maybe 3 books, or I've got a series I'm coming up with the Dragonbacks. I knew I was going to do 6 books right from the beginning. It's a matter of doing the build-up, a complete story with trailing plot threads and character arcs through each of the books until the big payoff at the end, which is very critical. I've got one of the little Disney souvenir things from Disney. It's the key in the Pirates of the Caribbean to Davy Jones' locker, and it sits where I can see it as a reminder, do not screw up part 3.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. My next question was, I take it you're a plotter.
Just mostly yes. However, the terms plotter or seat of the pantser, I've heard it also as architect and gardener. That the architect builds the story and the gardener just kind of lets it grow. I am kind of an architect who's building a greenhouse. So that I know what I'm doing, but occasionally something will occur to me that's better and the garden takes over into the new section of the greenhouse. So I'm a hybrid of that sort of thing, but I do start out as the plotter, as the architect to the.
Okay, great. DB, I'm afraid to say David, because it sounds like a bad movie.
Because then Beetlejuice shows up?
Yeah. Have you seen the Beetlejuice around here? Fabulous. Anyway, DB, when you...
JM.
Yes, you can do that. People call me much worse. When you sat down to write your epic saga, how did you construct it? And yeah, let's ask, did you build it from the ground up knowing what the structure was going to look like in general? Or did it, spring organically? Or you built the greenhouse and the tree burst through the window?
So I'm a big believer in the idea that the pantser versus plotter question is actually non-binary.
Okay.
It's not one or the other. You exist along a continuum from one extreme to the other. The most recent epic series that I consider epic that I wrote was a time travel epic fantasy series called the Isledale Cycle that I wrote as D.B. Jackson. And it was, as I say, it was time travel, and so the way I constructed it, the way I conceived it was the very first chapter in the first book of the trilogy is repeated almost verbatim in the very last chapter of the third book, because it's time travel and we're dealing with stuff that's happening in this very strange time construct. But the way I constructed the story and the way I made it feel epic to me as I was planning it was I created a world that I felt was complex and rich and worthy of setting a story that was going to have a lot of reach. And I had a variety of characters, a cast of characters, of POV characters, who I felt were going to be able to carry the story so that I could decide as I was going through the storyline, all right, whose story is paramount in this particular moment? And that's how I chose my point of view character for each chapter or each section. And as soon as, for me at least, as soon as I start dealing with multiple characters and multiple point of views, my story widens and it becomes more emotionally satisfactory, more compelling from a narrative point of view. And to a certain degree, there's an organic quality to the writing then. You're letting the characters carry the story and take you where they will. And there's a certain degree to which I'm planning it out using those characters to say, okay, here's how my story's going to progress.
Okay, so the multiple POV adds to the epic quality and the breadth of the work.
For me,
Yeah,
it does,
okay.
yes.
Okay, great, okay. Kevin, okay, when you sat down to, continue Dune, when you sat down to write something completely new and original, how do you, set out to write an epic, and how do you construct it? And is it plotted? I'm using the very basic terms,
Sure.
and yes, it's a continuum, I know that. But did you primarily start out with an outline, or did you go, okay, this character's driving me crazy, let me put him, her, they on paper and see where it goes?
Well, I'm going to use my Saga of Seven Sons as an example. It's 7 volumes long, start to finish, and I knew what was going to happen from start to finish, but not in any detail. I knew, like, this happened in book 1, and this happened in book 2, and this is a big pivot in book 4, and this is how it ends. And so just sort of like little shorthand notes of what happens in each one. But when I'm plotting the actual book, and I really plot in detail, especially for epics, Because if you've got, I have one volume in that series was on the Hugo Ballad, and I counted, and it had 35 point of view characters. And if you got 35 point of view characters, you're basically a general trying to get all of your troops organized, or you're a dance choreographer choreographing a whole chorus line. You can't just let them all do whatever they want and hope that all the 34 storylines come together, because there's so many different stories on so many different planets that this storyline on this planet has to occur so that it sets up this event that triggers this event that goes to that event, and you can't just make that up as you go along, or I can't. So I spend a lot of time, I used to do it with colored index cards. I would cover my floor with, like, green index cards would be this character, and red index cards would be that character, and white index card, and I'd do a little one-liner, this is the event that happens, and I'd lay them out on the floor, and I'd rearrange it like, oh, it's been too many blue chapters in a row, and I'd move them around. That didn't work because we have cats, and they like to play with it. So now I actually type in the one-liners in Word, and I just change the color to green and blue and red and whatever. And I love this visual skeleton that I can just like look down and go, man, it's been a long time since there's been a red chapter. We better remind the reader of that. And there's so much room for an epic that I can come up with minor characters with little storylines I can lace through that just flesh out the story. It's not the main driving plot of the galactic war, but it's the story of the blockade runner pirate ship that loses fuel in an asteroid belt, and that's just an interesting little story to
Making
go
it
through.
more, reducing the scale to human, in other words.
And so that, I'm a very detailed plotter, but that's as far as I go. So that when I'm actually, I'll have one sentence that says the cargo ship gets stranded in an asteroid and the pilot has to solve this and get out of there.
Yeah.
So then I can pants it when I'm writing that chapter, because I don't know how any of that stuff happens. So it's kind of the best of
Yeah,
both.
you just know it needs to be there. David, what about you? How do you set out to construct this? Where on the continuum of plotting and pantsing are you? And
Well, okay, first of all, I think everybody has his or her own tool set for doing this. And secondly, I have been known to approach a series both ways. The way I'm most comfortable doing it is I know what the beginning point of the story that I want to tell is, and I know what the end point of the story that I want to tell is. And I have a couple of threads that I want to wind through. But instead of trying to build that in detail, what I do is I build the world, the universe this is happening in the greatest detail that I possibly can. And then I proceed along those lines towards the objective that I want, and I see as I'm going along, okay, where's this going? Oh, okay, fine. All right, now you do have to keep a lot of balls in the air. I have a very large cast of characters in most of my books, and you have to keep track of where they are and what you've done with them and what they're going to do next and everything else. But I'm progressing towards the end point rather than worrying about any of the midpoints until I get there. And that's how the Honorverse was written. And it actually created a problem for me when I couldn't kill Honor when she was supposed to die. And that was not because people were going to say, we will fire you if you do that. It was because I'd gotten Eric Flint involved in some collaborations which had injected their DNA into the series and had pulled the storyline forward on me. So there wasn't enough time to work to get to where I was going to be in the interval after her death. All right, well, the problem was that then left me with this sort of vacuole in the middle of the storyline where I had to spend a couple of books kind of getting my feet back under me to get the storyline moving to where it needed to move. That can be a problem. Now, especially if you are doing stories like the Honorverse, where you have message transmission over huge distances, and it's going to take, 16 days for this message to get from here. You need a detailed timeline that you can keep track of events on, and that turns itself into sort of a skeleton that you're building the story around. The timing is not the story, the timing is controlling where the story goes and how you can do it. And then there are collaborations where you are very carefully dividing who does what, and there has to be, like for instance with Eric Flint on the Crown of Slave novels, okay, there has to be a division going in. This is what you're going to write, this is what I'm going to write, this is where the story is going to go. So I don't really have a set way to approach how I'm going to do this. I think that what keeps it fresh for me and what keeps the story going forward is that I have never finished a story, including a standalone novel, that didn't leave me with questions about what happens next. And in a series, that for me, the key to the next book is where did we wind up in the last book, and what issues do we have that we still have to face. I will say this, the Honorverse was not really conceived by me as primarily a series of novels about Honor Harrington. It was conceived as a series which would deal with the war between the Star Kingdom of Manticore and the People's Republic of Haven, and where it went from there. And Honor was the primary character and viewpoint into the universe. So in the sense of an epic notion of where the story goes, what I had is the story goes to this point in resolving the conflict and everything else, and then the characters interacting with one another did a lot to control what happened along the way, if that makes any sense.
It gets back to the notion that was expressed earlier to the effect that in an epic, the universe of that epic becomes a character and a plot driver in and of itself, if I got that right.
I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. But by the same token, it can't become the primary plot driver of the stories that are involved in the epic. It's the driving plot point for the epic as a whole, but not for the stories that comprise the epic, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. I presume that from everything that has been said about the Honorverse, you didn't know when you started it how big it was going to get in terms of number of books.
I originally projected it at about 6 books. And it was like, wow, there's a lot more here, kind of thing. And I think that you have to be willing to let a story grow as long as it's growing and not just expanding. And you have to understand where the difference between those are.
That's a great distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Which of course leads, this is the question, the next question, because we're going to try to get everything from the description of the panel, to how do you decide that question? And DB, I'm going to ask you that one, because you made the mistake of opening your mouth,
Yeah, I do that a lot. So what distinction between...
The question is, how do you decide how many books are going to be in your epic? Or do you? I mean, it's valid.
No, for me,
yeah.
and I say this knowing that I'm on a panel with people who have done very well doing the opposite of what I'm about to say. But for me, I decide ahead of time how long a series is going to be. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't change. Mm-hmm. And so if I decide a story is going to be 3 volumes, like the time travel epic fantasy I was talking about before, that's the room I've got to tell the story. And if the story proceeds organically the way I envision it, I should be able to fill those 3 volumes and nothing more. I don't want to expand the story in a way that feels like I'm just milking my readers and milking my stories. Now, I'm not saying that that's what other people do. All I'm saying is, for me, the best way for me to go about writing my stories is to decide ahead of time how many books I'm going to fill and write to that length.
Different tool set for everybody.
Yeah,
Every story.
exactly.
Yeah.
Tim, what about you? Did you decide ahead of time, or did it grow organically? There are no wrong answers here. I tease these people because most of them I have known for a long, well, at least two of them I have known a very long time. But yeah, there are no wrong answers because every writer is completely different. So Tim.
There's some books where you do a standalone and then you see there's another story after that and then another one after that. Generally speaking nowadays with a trilogy, I know it's going to be a trilogy. Okay, Conquerors, that's going to be 3 books. The Dragonback books I knew from the beginning was going to be 6. The one I'm working on now, the Icarus saga, it started with a single book to see the Icarus plot, to see if anybody was interested in picking up this universe again. I had an idea for a second and then a third, and in the third to the end, I could figure out, okay, 2 more after this will finish it off. So I didn't know when I started, but midway through, okay, here's the rest of the story and it ends here. So I could, it's again a hybrid. Sometimes I know, sometimes I keep going, but I generally know before the last book where the book is good, which one is going to be the end.
Okay, that's sort of in between the two. So,
Yeah.
Kevin, what about you? Have you decided ahead of time for all your epic stories or not?
Yeah. Well, let's make a distinction, because a series, you can just keep writing books with the same characters, and it's like Star Trek is a series.
Sherlock Holmes.
And it's pretty epic. They do lots of stuff, but it's not. Star Trek isn't an epic, as in like a saga with the beginning and end. My Saga of 7 Sons, because it's 7 sons, I assumed it would be 7 books, and I kind of plotted that out. But I find that my real comfort zone is trilogies. I like writing a trilogy because it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you kind of know where it wraps up. And I like that. I've done quite a few trilogies. And I've been kind of thinking since our beginning about the number of books it takes to make an epic. And I started recalling epics used to be 1 book. I mean, Dune is 1 book. Shogun is an epic. It's 1 book. My favorite book of all time is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. That's 1 book, but that sure is an epic. Lord of the Rings, you think of it as a trilogy, but it's really 1 book. And then I started thinking, well, whoever wrote an epic romance novel? And I went, The Thornbirds is an epic romance novel. So you can tell these really big, epic stories in 1 volume. You kill a lot of trees, and they're big, but we actually haven't talked about like commercial publication and considerations that back in the 70s or so, it was a big deal to sell these doorstop books, and everybody basically bought books by the pound because that's what they wanted. It is not a very good commercial prospect now. I was talking with Tom Doherty, the publisher of Tor Books, that I said he must be so excited because of the Terry Goodkind books and the Robert Jordan books, because they're the big fat ones and he can charge like $8.99 for a paperback cover price. And Tom said, that's not really feasible because you can charge $8.99 instead of $5.99. That's how long ago this conversation was. But he said, I can fit 4 or 5 of the $5.99 paperbacks in a paperback slot in a grocery store, but I can only fit 2 Robert Jordan $8.99 in the same slot. So do the math. Were you going to make more money at 4 or 5 times $5.99 or 2 times $8.99? And so they sold like crazy, but they could put fewer copies of them in the real estate that they had. Now, of course, we have ebooks, so it doesn't make that much difference at all. So that's a whole different thing. But then I'll get on to publishing stuff, and that's a whole different question.
I'm having a very easy time with this as moderator because they keep anticipating my questions and leading into them, which is
Well,
great.
your notes are right there.
Well, yeah.
Good for you.
But they actually read them. Okay. But the other thing that's into play has been the supply chain issues. Paper being very hard to come by, and I know that a lot of authors have been affected by the need to postpone releases or having release dates pushed back. So that also plays into it, something that wasn't considered in the days of $5.99 paperbacks and $8.99 door stoppers. Tim, has this been your experience of, publishing epic fantasies and the fact that you need to reduce size to meet marketing demands, or is it just you write the book and you tell the story in the space it takes to tell it, and let the publisher worry about that?
Mostly the latter. My books tend to come out in around 100 to 120,000 word, which is a fairly good word length for most publishers. The last book of a trilogy often is longer because there are all the plot threads and character arcs to fill out. But yeah, I'm kind of in a sweet spot. You talk about publishing. I remember someone telling me years ago that they had been asked by some publisher, the editor, what book would you like to come out in August? What do you mean, what book? Well, the last Harry Potter book is coming out, and all the presses in the country are going to be churning out volumes of that. You get one book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've
So
heard tales like that, yes.
Those
So-
are considerations in all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. David?
I can honestly say that has never been an issue for me. And I do know, going back to the previous question for a minute,
Sure.
John Ringo and I are doing the Empire of Man series.
Who's got the signature theme that involves, the guitar and banjo?
I don't know, but yeah. But actually, the reason that we were collaborating in that series was that John is a fantastic storyteller, but he had never been trained as a writer. And so Jim asked me if I would do a collaboration with him in kind of a mentoring process. So I get this call from John, and he says, "David, I got like 400,000 words." And I'm like, well, that's a little much, John, No, I'm sorry. He said, "Hey, I've got 200,000 words." And I said, "Well, that's good." He said, "No, that's bad." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I'm halfway through the outline for the first book." And I said, "Yeah, that could be a problem. Send it to me. I'll see what I can do." So he sent it to me, and I looked at it, and I said, "Well, there's only one solution." I called Jim, and I said, "Jim, that trilogy." Okay? And we added a book to it because everything he'd done was great. It was just that the outline had expanded beyond a point that I had assumed. Now, I will say that I had, I think it was War of Honor was the first of my hardcovers to break into like the top 4 on the New York Times list. And then Uncompromising Honor just blew through the doors on that one for total sales. But the difference was that on the War of Honor, we had like I can't remember what it was. It was high double-digit thousand sales in hardcover when it was first released. And in Uncompromising, we only had like about 10,000, 15,000 in hardcover. The difference was the sale of the ebooks, which is how the publishing industry has shifted in that regard. And I don't think I've never had an issue from Baen or Tor over there's a production problem with the book that you want to do, or with the scheduling of the book that you want to do, or whatever. It's been more a case of what's coming out that we're scheduling against. Where do we place this book in the known release schedules of other publishers? And since Tor and Baen They really have a pretty close association that a lot of people don't realize. They kind of have this gentleman's agreement about who gets the Christmas release this time around, or whatever, if it's one of my books. That's where the logistics have been more in my experience with where the books come out.
Yeah. David DB?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, how has the impact of size, also the impact of production realities, because that's where this question has gone, affected your epics? Or has it? I mean, have you grown from the era of the doorstopper to the era of the lean, mean writing machine? Or has it been pretty much consistent throughout your career? And has your epics faced challenges from the production standpoint?
So I had this one book where they said I could write a 100,000 word book, but I wasn't allowed to use any word twice. And that was a really hard book.
That was an academic.
Wow.
Rationing, huh?
Really hard. I mean, figuring out where to use the.
Prepositions must have been a real
Oh, it's a
killer.
bitch, yeah. When I was working on the Winds of the Foreland series, which was my second series, we actually originally contracted it as 4 books. And after the first 2 books were each 200,000 words. And this was right around the time when all of a sudden price point was becoming a big deal, and the bricks and mortars were complaining about shelf space and stuff like that. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And
Do not expect us to river dance.
yes,
That happened.
It would be ugly.
suddenly I feel like I'm in a James Dickey novel.
Well, yeah, I mean, Irish, for heaven's sake.
And they came to me after the second book, and they said, the books are too long, and we'd like you to find a way to do the last 2 books as actually the last 3 books, and make it into a 5-book series, and reduce it from 200,000 words a book to about 140,000 words a book. And I was actually able to do it only because I had written the 3rd book, or I was writing the 3rd book, and there was a natural stopping point at about the 2/3 mark that I was going to blow past to get to the other natural stopping point that I knew was coming. And I was able to do, and as it turned out, this was a good thing. I mean, it was a 5-book series. They ended up giving me another advance for the 5th book, even though, so it worked out well. But that was the one time when book length really became an issue for one of my publishers, and they asked me to change something about a series.
Okay.
I will say that writing big books, long books, which I have a tendency to do by word count, is probably more in the 180 to 220,000 word range.
I just want to say it's weird that this is your soundtrack.
Yeah. But the one thing that it does mean is that you sell less total books, because the time that you are investing in writing that longer book divided among a greater number of smaller books is going to generate more releases and ultimately generate more sales. So in some ways you hurt yourself from a production viewpoint by investing the time in the big book instead of splitting it among, say, 2 smaller ones.
Okay.
Well, and I'd rather get paid for 2 smaller books than because they don't really pay you more for the big one.
No, that's true. That's what I'm saying.
And
We don't get paid by the word the way that you do for short stories.
Yeah.
Okay, novelists don't. I wish we did, because what books I write.
Well, and the other thing is that production realities in traditional publishing used to be that they could not come out with books quickly. Well, Baen could often.
Yeah, Baen could, yes.
But like if I'm writing this big epic thing, I would rather tell the story more in an episodic fashion, still tell the same big story, but you as readers, wouldn't you rather read a 50,000 word book every 2 or 3 months rather than a big book every 3 years? I mean, would you rather watch the weekly episode of The Expanse or watch one Expanse movie every 3 years? I mean, we like to have a regular dose of what we're doing. And I would rather, if I'm doing it now, and I'm my own publisher now, I can do things as an indie publisher, I would be writing my Saga of Seven Sons, but I would be giving it into 30 pieces instead of 7 giant books. And you would get one every couple of months.
The problem that I would have doing that is that because of the way I structure the story, the way I write the story, the first 30,000 words aren't locked until I've done the last 30,000 words. So how with this story that I'm
Well, just write 30 books and get them.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. I knew you were going to say that.
Okay.
Take an extra week.
While they're arguing this point, we have a somewhat limited time for questions from the audience, and I don't know that they'll be able to record what you say, but if I can hear it, I'll repeat it. Okay, questions, Bueller? Okay, gentleman in the green t-shirt, and then gentleman in the blue. Yes, sir?
Just a quick question. Kevin, did the cats get editing credit on that book?
Kevin, did the cats get any editing credit on the book?
They were disacknowledged at the end.
Disavowing.
Sir?
Just the kind of question that might be more general for the whole panel. Do you think authors have now gotten different or trained differently to do more epic? Because, I mean, you look at people like Niven, he did the Tales of No Space, but that was kind of an afterthought after he wrote separate books. Or even, even people like Heinlein, a lot of his stuff, he kind of back traced some of his books to make them all fit, and so that they were more of a tale of a whole big epic.
Okay, yeah.
So is it that you think nowadays people are more trained to do 3 books or 4 books in a series, or just more of an epic story?
Okay, the question has to do with what writers are setting out to do and whether they have been trained differently from the classics of science fiction, say Larry Niven, Robert Heinlein, who retconned their work to make them into epic. Okay, shall we start with you, Tim?
Trained in the sense that rats are trained by giving them food to go through the maze. The editors have always liked epics because you've got a built-in audience from the first book on. So a lot of times they would prefer trilogies and more rather than a group of standalone books, which is how the old masters did it, Heinlein, Clark, etc. So I don't know if, I know the editors have always told me they like longer series. I don't know, you guys get that
I'm so
too?
sorry.
David, your mic's working.
Maybe not trained, but just seeing, maybe it's just a society or
Well,
things shifted.
I think that readership has grown and shifted a lot from those days too. And that means that there is a bigger readership for what we are producing. And for example, there are people today whose sales eclipse what someone like Heinlein did during his lifetime and whatnot, without being the titanic influence on the field that Heinlein was during his lifetime, because the sales numbers are different, the market is different, the readership is different. If anybody out there has ever read E.E. Smith, okay, you're talking epic from, from the nether regions, for his stuff from the get-go, and that was the golden age of science fiction while everybody's writing the standalone books. Here's Ed Smith, and he's, boom, 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 boom. So I don't think that it's that we're trained to do something differently. I think that the marketing reality is such that, as Tim was saying, it works differently. Okay.
I would just add, speaking as an editor, speaking loudly, as an editor, difference between long and epic. And I believe that concision is a lost art among younger writers.
Okay, well, I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. Kevin, any thoughts on this question?
On this panel as a young writer. I just want to make
We believe you.
No, you know that they're over there thinking, why do these people keep talking over our music? So, actually, one of the things that audience has changed. What we watch in movies from the 50s are different from what we watch in movies now, and in TV shows and everything. So successful writers write what the audience wants now, and that's a chicken and egg problem, really. But I had actually one more example that came to my mind. That a truly epic book that I love is Stephen King's The Stand. And if you remember, some of you are old enough to remember when it first came out, it was a much shorter book. And they told Stephen King to cut out something like 50,000 words. And he said, why? Is it boring or slow? And they said, no, we need to get it under a certain price point for the paperback, and that's the number of words you have to cut. So for no reason other than the price point of the paperback, that was his third book, I think. And so he didn't have the clout to say no. He had to cut out it wasn't random, but for no real reason, literarily, he had to cut out 30,000 words, or some huge amount. And it was later that he became Stephen King with like all capital letters that he said, no, I'm going to put that stuff back in and publish the complete version of it, and that's the only version you can get now, and it is much better, I think.
One thing, Kevin, while you were talking, and this just made me think about it. My first novel, the collaboration Insurrection with Steve White, was first submitted to Avon, where John Douglas was the editor at the time, and John loved it, and everybody loved it, but it was too long. I worked with him for a year trying to cut it down to a length that the front office would let him buy as a first novel. We finally got it down to about 135,000 words, and he said, you can't take anything else out because you'd be removing bone now. So withdraw it, submit it to someplace that does more military science fiction, tell them the only reason that I didn't buy it was the front office wouldn't let me and they should call me so I could tell them so, which is about the best rejection you're ever going to get. But he said, I feel terrible, you've worked with us for a year on this and they won't let me buy it. So I submitted it to Baen, and a week later, Tony Weisskopf called me and they bought it. But I really hadn't thought about that while we were talking here, but that probably was a decision on the part of the front office at Avon that we're not going to commit the money to produce a book that long from an author who doesn't have a track record.
Okay, I would love to take more questions, but we are at the end of the hour, and I want to give each of these gentlemen the opportunity to tell you where you can find them. So, David, DB.
You can find me at davidbco.com. I will be on another panel this evening over the urban fantasy track. I have panels tomorrow. I have a signing on Monday. But davidbco.com is the best place to find me. And thank you all for coming.
David Weber.
You can find me in most bookstores, you can find me on Amazon, all those things. You can find me at Baen. And I'm not as active online as I used to be because there's a lot of stuff going on in my life, so that's probably not the best place to look for me. I do have another panel this evening on humor in science fiction, Get Thee to a Punnery, which should be fun, you know. So, you know, if you're free, drop by.
Okay, Tim.
I've got a Star Wars authors panel next, I think. It's the Star Wars authors. In the Empire, we're going to that one too. Follow us. Otherwise, online, on Facebook, and look in the app to see where else I'll be this weekend.
And other than the Star Wars panel next with Tim, I've got tomorrow at 2:30, I'm with my Dune comic artist, Michael Shelfer, and he and I will be doing a Dune comics panel and a big signing right after that. That's over at the Merchandise Mart on the Artist Alley, floor 4.
Okay, great. Thank you, gentlemen, for a fascinating panel. Thank you all out there in the audience. You're a great audience, and I apologize that I didn't get more of your questions. And if you like what you see here and you want them to give these gentlemen more time, please rate us on the app. Thank you.
And buy the CD.